Well, welcome everybody. I'm Sandy Laws, and this is Jeremiah Delasio, and we are excited to be announcing a new podcast series, and we're calling this series James, Real Life and Real Faith. And we're focusing on the book of James, which was written by Jesus's brother, younger brother, James. And the reason that we're going into detail about this book is because it has such a practical application for our life, in that James wants to help us to determine, to figure out how to live out our faith in Jesus in a practical, active way. And I think this is a timely message for everybody in the church because we are called to live our life as Jesus wants us to, as the Heavenly Father has willed for us. So I'm excited to get into some more specific details about how to live our lives today.
So Sandy, the name. Tell me about why you chose this name for this series.
James, I think, has the most practical advice among all the New Testament letter writers about how we move our faith from its beginning stages into a much more mature faith and relationship with Jesus over the duration of our life. And so I like the fact that, we're going to try to understand what Jesus's brother thinks that we should do, how to have our life intersecting with our faith and living that out in an active way.
I love it also because I thought it was hilarious. We decided to do this series after Easter because of just how deep Easter feels, right? And let's go to something that's very practical and very simple. And then this might be the pithiest 5-chapter book in the Bible. I mean, maybe you could say that about all of them, but the practicality, but also the nuance and depth of all of this is challenging and exciting. So we're starting in chapter 1 today, and you've got some thoughts for us.
I do. I want to talk about this letter specifically and why James wrote it and who is James. I already mentioned that he's the brother of Jesus. He's the younger brother of Jesus, probably second born to Mary and Joseph. So he may be a couple years younger than Jesus. So perhaps he was born around, 2 or 1 BC. And during Jesus's life, of course, they had a brotherly relationship, but when Jesus started his ministry, James was not a believer in his brother. That didn't happen until later when he encountered the resurrected Christ, and then he became a believer. And once he started on his path of faith and belief in Jesus, he had a very long career in the early church, specifically in Jerusalem, helping the church to grow. And as a leader in the church, it was his job, it was his calling to help get this brand new community together and to figure out how to live a life of faith in Christ. And of course, this was different than how the Jewish people and the Gentiles had lived their life before. So it took some practical wisdom, some practical information, really garnered from a long period of time of working with churches and leaders to convey to us what are the steps we need to take once we become a believer.
I like it. So the church, when he wrote this letter, the church was about 30 years old at that point in time. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I think that Jesus died when he was 35 or 34, so around 28, 29, 30 AD. And then James dies in 62 AD. He's martyred. And we don't know exactly how, but he is martyred. And he spent really the duration of his ministry, so roughly 30 years, as I said, in Jerusalem, where he was considered a leader as alongside Paul and Peter and John and James. So he had a very significant role in really developing and crafting the community of new believers, the way, if you will, the followers of Christ.
Now he would have been. So Paul was like considered the first big leader of the church, right? And James would have just been new to faith during that period. Is that accurate?
I think we can maybe not break it down that specifically, but just say that what emerged was a group of leaders all through those decades. And of course, we know that Peter was the leader of the apostles after the resurrection of Christ. But we see James in the book of Acts, in Acts chapter 1, there with the early group of people, the 120 who are together. And this is the beginnings of this church, this group of 120 that Peter speaks to. So he's there very early. I think that he just had stature because of his relationship with his brother and because of the skills that he brought to the church and how to grow it.
But probably during Jesus' ministry, he was not he may not even been in much contact with him during that period because he didn't believe, from our understanding.
Yeah, he actually was against his brother in a way. He was taunting his brother at times, not really acting in faith, not aligned with Jesus at all, but he did come to faith, which is great. And he spent the duration of his life supporting the message of Jesus, which I think is wonderful.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive in. What do you got for us at the start of this thing?
Well, right off the bat, we see how James calls himself, which I think is fascinating, a slave to Jesus. And gosh, that got me thinking that we are all kind of a slave to something, aren't we? Like throughout our lives, we attach ourselves to certain things and we become a slave to something. And in this case, he's saying, you're either a slave to Jesus or you're a slave to the world, which is not a good place to be. And he begins with this discussion about trials and temptations. And Jeremiah, we just face trial after trial in our lives, don't we?
It feels like that. Wave after wave, it never stops.
Yeah. And some trials are really big, and some are as simple as frustration over the day's schedule, or they come in all sizes and shapes, trials. And this, I think, is just the nature of life here on earth. But we do have a choice in how we respond to trials, right? And what do you think, how do you think James wants us to respond to trials in our life?
Well, James has this idea that it should be joy. We should be joyful and happy about facing our trials, which at least I first hear that. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I should change my mindset. This is kind of a Marcus Aurelius stoicism kind of thought, like it's all mindset. And then that falls away from my brain really quickly. I'm like, do you know anybody? Like, are you really excited when a trial happens? I can say I'm not, and then maybe that just shows the lack of depth in my character. I don't know. But what about you? Are you joyful when trials happen?
I think I understand their purpose more now than I did before. I used to just feel irritated about them. Like, well, why doesn't it get easier? There's a lot of that feeling around, as a Christian, as a believer, should my life be easier? And I think James is telling us, no, it's not. It will never be easy because we face trials for a reason. And when we face them and we internalize them, they produce a desired effect. And what is that desired effect that James is speaking to?
Perseverance, maturity, to be able to move through these things and understand how these things can be used. James goes on later to talk about temptations are not from God, right? I think part of it, we have to understand just the world we live in, and the way things are not the way they were supposed to be, but God will use these things to draw us closer to him, to make us more like the person we're supposed to be. So from there, I can get a lot of comfort, not even comfort, I guess comfort. But I can develop that perseverance, and maybe someday, as you're alluding to, that will lead to the joy of like, okay, I'm using my perseverance, which seems to be, as James lays out for us, one of the core foundational pieces in a godly life.
Yeah, I love that thought. I think we have to be very careful about assuming that because we're believers in Christ, we won't face trials or will somehow be protected, because it seems to be quite the opposite. But I want to get back to a point where you were talking about trials and temptations, because those really are two different things, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if they're always mutually exclusive, but they are different things at times.
Yeah. I think how I see the distinction between them is that trials are a bit of a test of our faith. Like, how are we going to respond as a Christian when we are in a trial? And I think that's super important, because people know when we're facing a trial. And so we become an advocate for Christ when we face it well, versus temptations are something that's different. They never come from God. God does not tempt us. He has no desire to do that. So where do temptations come from? Where do they come from?
They come from the dark side of things, right? They come from Satan. They come from our fallen nature. I mean, I think you can put whatever wrapper you want on that. You know that there is a draw. I can speak for myself. There's a draw inside me to do what is not right, many times in my life. And I can, through learning about this, you clearly say that is not of God. God is not placing that inside of me. That's coming from my fallen nature. That's coming from other than him, other than his best plan for me. So I want to go back real quickly and touch on the idea of trials versus temptations. Is there like a working, because you and I both love to keep things practical, right? What does this actually mean for me today and this week? So again, trials and temptations. Do you have a way to discern what is happening in the moment when you encounter something that's uncomfortable in life? Or do you not get that optic until after it's passed?
I think with a trial, it's coming because it's going to impact your life. It's something that's going to impact your life. And it could be anything from a family dynamic or a relationship that's broken, or a health issue, or a financial struggle. So those trials are always kind of in front of us and all around us. And again, we're called to respond practically in a way that glorifies our relationship with Christ. Recognize that we will always face trials, but God is always with us. Versus a temptation, when I think about it, it always kind of starts internally, right? It comes from me. And it tends to be this idea of I desire something that's just out of my reach. But it feels like I can get it. But maybe to get it, I have to do something that's not so good. That's actually bad. That's crossing a moral boundary. And this is where Satan wants us to get to, cross the moral boundary. Go ahead and try to get it. So the question is, what do we do when we face a real temptation?
Absolutely. Let's say that maybe not you, because I know this would never happen to you, but let's say you've crossed the moral boundary, right? What do you do?
For 100% I have in my life. I mean, I'm certainly not perfect and far from it. And I would say that temptation can come from our desires. It can also come from Satan wanting to take us away from our relationship. So what do you do? Well, Jesus probably models the best behavior on what to do when we face temptation, and that is to pray. So practically speaking, whenever we're facing a trial or a temptation, we really need to stop, recognize what's happening, use our mind and our heart, and pray to God to help us. Pray to God for wisdom. A big theme in James's book, wisdom. If we don't, we might just plow straight forward and make the trial bigger and worse, or we might just jump right into that temptation, and then it becomes a big mess in our life. So pray.
Absolutely. I love it. I mean, because the number one question everybody asks is, why do bad things happen to Christians, right? Now, I don't know if we have a direct answer for that, but I like that you just alluded to where we're going next. James talks about wisdom. What does James tell us about wisdom?
So many things. And here in chapter 1, he just introduces the topic because he spends a lot more time talking about it a little bit later. But I guess I would like to start by saying that we're all seeking wisdom. We think wisdom is valuable to have. We know it's valuable. Within us, we know it's valuable. So we go to many sources for wisdom. And in our culture today, there's no lack of sources, right? It can be, I mean, what are the sources of wisdom that you go to when you're seeking wisdom or seeking to learn something or to gain knowledge or advice about something? Where do you go for it?
Well, in the era that we live in, obviously, YouTube or Google, you try to find a subject matter expert, and that's the answer that I think we all have. Now, in prepping for this, you and I started to quickly create boxes for our language. There's a godly wisdom, and then there is just, let's call it a worldly wisdom. And I'm not saying worldly as in moral wisdom, but it is a different wisdom than godly wisdom. Like a worldly wisdom will say, have your retirement account in order, make sure that you have health insurance and all these things, and it's good. But that may not be godly wisdom. And you really clarified that for me a lot when we were prepping for this thing.
How so?
Yeah, I think that wisdom for me, I hear that word and it's an all-encompassing word, right?
Yeah,
and then
big word.
And we started to go through, I think wisdom can, at least for me, move into it's a tactical plan to get outcomes that I want, right? And that could be an outcome from, I want to get my children ready for this life, right? What's the wisdom of how do I want to raise my boys, right? It could be wisdom in business. It can be wisdom in how do I treat my wife, or it could be godly wisdom. But I think one thing in these conversations, it talks about God will give wisdom to those who are found without fault. And I get frustrated sometimes because many situations in my life, I don't have any clarity. I don't have any wisdom. I don't have any belief of what's going to happen in these things. And then if I really check my motives, what am I trying to do, right? What is, as you alluded to previously, what is my desire in this? And if it's for me, right? That wisdom's probably not going to be forthcoming from God, right? I'm probably going to have to go to a Joe Rogan or somebody to get that, right? Now, if my wisdom is of my faith and of my calling, God's going to give that to me. And that's the type of wisdom I should seek out more as I continue down this journey, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good, overall thought process about it, because there's this whole intellectual wisdom that we get from our knowledge and from our education and from our career, our life journey. And then there's knowledge that we get from outside sources. And we can combine those and say, okay, from this, I'm going to create a plan of action or a path. But what James is saying is that, no, don't do that, because the worldly wisdom will always lead you astray. Instead, you want to seek God's wisdom. And the key to receiving God's wisdom is to ask for what he wants for your life in accordance to his will. It's this combining your life, his will. So when we don't do that, then we're just seeking wisdom on kind of an intellectual level. And people love to do that. They love to think that their intellect is so great, they have all the answers. But when we go to him in humility and say, I surrender my life to you, I don't have all the answers, show me what you would have me do within your will for my life, and guide me in my thinking and my steps, in my daily steps. He's more than happy to reply to that and provide it to you in abundance, which is a really wonderful thing. I mean, we have to remember, as James says, every good and perfect gift comes from God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, the wisdom thing is fascinating to me because what is our pitfalls of Christians? So what does God want from us? God wants a relationship with us, and the key to that relationship is faith, right? But what do we want? We want certitude. We want clarity. We want understanding. Like, how often do we find ourselves praying for clarity? But guess what? Faith and clarity don't go together, right? Unfortunately, as much as I wish that they did. Like, if your whole life was laid out to you, Sandy, you do these things, everything's going to be fine. That's not faith. That's a plan. So I think we find ourselves seeking wisdom for a plan of how do I get the outcomes that I want? How do I make sure no bad things happen to me or my family, right? How do I make sure my retirement is paid for? How do I make, right? Just fill in whatever, everybody, we all have different needs, different emotions that we're scared about. We want to pray for wisdom of how to solve these problems. But that is not faith. Faith is that these things are going to work out the way they're supposed to if I live a godly life, right? Not necessarily desirable outcomes either, right? Like James did not have a desirable outcome. So to recap, I think on this wisdom thing, it's incredible because it's not this big bucket. You have to posture yourselves in a godly way. And if you're looking for perfect answers of how to make the perfect business deal or be a perfect parent, that's probably not here. If you want to learn how to be closer to God, that's the wisdom that is being discussed here.
I kind of agree with that.
Okay.
I think that there is a practicality to God's wisdom. I do. Like, I think you can pray about, I'm pursuing a certain thing. Is that in your will for me? And the question is, do we hear his voice when he answers that question? How do we discern God's calling for our life? And I think this is what James is trying to teach us to do. Go to God in all circumstances for all things and align yourself with his kingdom, his people, and you will be much more attuned to what he wants. You get that little feeling like this doesn't feel right, or there's a red flag, or you just feel convicted in your heart that I think there's something else. So I think it's two levels, really. Your spiritual wisdom comes from him, but also practical wisdom for steps in our life. It's all really a matter of how often do we go to him and ask for it. It's like an endless, bottomless well. And so what keeps us from tapping into that is our own, I can handle it. I can do it. I've got a good idea. I don't want to bother God by going back all the time. I want to be my own independent person. We live in a society that highly values independence, right? But I guess you could say it would feel weird if every minute of every day you're asking him. He did give us a brain and a heart and a spirit, the Holy Spirit. So it's a bit of a juggling act, isn't it? Like how much, how often, when, about what?
So I got a couple questions for you. First, if I were to say that maybe a quick thing, understanding of godly wisdom versus not godly wisdom is, am I seeking more control of an outcome? And if I'm trying to get God to give me more control, probably not what I should be asking for. Right now, because God wants all good and great, all good gifts are from him, right? So he wants to give us. Like, this is not a vengeful God, right? So maybe that's because I like how your response to my thought. Like, those are not mutually exclusive ideas, right? Like the wisdom that's going to take care of your life and God's wisdom, right? But where are you giving the power to, yourself or God?
I love that question. I love it.
And that's scary, right? Because I think even as Christians for a long time, it's hard. It's really, really hard. But that's, I think, the maturity of our faith that we have to step into if we're going to live the life that God really wants us to, because we're going to just be missing the gifts that he has for us if we don't. Yeah.
It's a little bit like leaving things on the road. You're walking from this life to our heavenly life. You're on a path. And if along the way God is wanting to give you gifts and you're leaving them behind because you have not relinquish control of your life or surrender to him, you're missing out on some good stuff. But your point about just wanting to have power, like this balance of power thing, this is a real question. And James definitely addresses it in terms of, here's the news, people. You don't have the power. God does. I'm just telling you what you need to know. So this is how you're going to tap into God's power, if you will, for your life.
So let's say somebody, because this happens to me, this happens to you. You've got a situation in your life. I've got a situation in my life. Our listeners have a situation in their life where they need wisdom. They like you said, there are things that I need discernment. Is this a red flag? Is this a good thing? How would you recommend somebody posture? Like just the quick ABC of this practical understanding of how would somebody move through that?
James actually speaks to this in this chapter when he says that we should be resolute in our belief. So we go to God and we seek wisdom. We must believe. We must have faith. We must go in faith and not be double-minded. Not say, well, you know what, God, I'm just going to come to you as one of the, 10 sources that I'm going to go to to solve this problem. Like I got you and I got Joe Rogan and I got my friend. No, you have to say, I'm going to get my wisdom from you, resoluteness. And then you do have to keep the world out of it. Keep the world away from it. Oh, man, I think that's a really hard thing in our lives because we can tap into so much information now, more than any other generation. We have information overload. So how do you keep the world out of your relationship with God? And practically speaking, you would do those two things. You would pray for wisdom in complete belief, and then you would, through discernment, listen to his voice and not listen to the voice. Now, that doesn't mean that people who are followers of Christ can't speak into your journey. I mean, he does use people to talk to you,
100%.
Right? He does use
more often
followers.
Than not.
Yeah, I mean, sure. So I'm not saying, well, don't listen to anybody. Just don't seek worldly advice. That's a different parameter, a different boundary.
Yeah, there's always there's some markers that I've discovered in my life of godly wisdom or this type of response to prayers. And a couple of things is it'll all be disparate sources. They'll all randomly say the same things, very similar ideas. And they all are very much like, this isn't as big of a deal as you think it is, traditionally, right? Like not saying that it doesn't matter, but in my mind, I've always keyed it up. And I find when I seek worldly wisdom, it's like, this is bigger than you actually think it is. You need to go attack this more. Now, I think everybody's got to develop their own way of approaching this, but I know for me, anytime in my life, I need clear counsel from God. It comes from multiple voices that don't know each other. They say similar things to me, and they're also like reminding me, like, God loves you. Like, God cares for you. Like, there's these other big picture things that always get brought into it, rather than like, you're screwing up or you got to fix this, like a sales job that you would get from a self-help guru, No,
I think that's an awesome way to put it. The voices in your head. Who are the voices in your head? And this is why God, by the way, Jesus wants us to protect what we put into our head, what we see with our eyes, what we listen to, because it can become quite polluted. But yeah, practically speaking, I think those are a few steps that we can do. I want to speak to, in James here, his comment about the tongue, our speaking, what we say. And he gets into this in much greater detail, but I do want to touch on it, which is, the fact is what James is saying is, are you quick to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger? I take from that, we just talk way too much, and we're awful listeners. That's what I take on a practical
I feel attacked,
level.
Sandy.
Not you. I meant me. I did. But in general, don't people just love to talk and to hear themselves talk and want to participate in every conversation, even if it has nothing to do with them?
Well, for sure. Like, what's the first move in how to win friends and influence people? Get people talking about themselves. They like it. Right? Like, this is just standard 101 programming in all of us. And this leads us a different way of, like, be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to angry. And then also, I think that you can ask yourself, again, like, this is your dashboard in front of you of how healthy you are. Are you quick to listen? Are you quick to respond? Right? Are you slow to anger? Like, I know in my life, if I ever do road rage, like if I ever have that inclination, it's instantly assigned to me something's out of whack in me because I'm getting quick to go, right? When I'm calm, when I'm in a good spot, somebody cuts me off, I don't care, right? If I'm out of whack, somebody cuts me off, I am livid. I want to go blow up somebody, right?
I feel like the road is the absolute crucible of this whole passage here because we feel invincible in our car and we're mad at everybody because they don't drive the same way as we do.
Right.
And we need to gain 5 minutes and it's going to be at somebody else's expense.
Right.
We just really haven't thought it through, but it all comes out, at least for me. I'm terrible at this whole driving thing and keeping it together. I'm mad at everybody. Like, why did you do that? Why did you cut me off and get out of my way? Or why are you going so slow? I need a lot of work in that regard.
I think you need to pray more, Sandy. You need a lot more prayer.
I do. I think I know what God would say, which is that he'd be like, well, why don't you leave a little earlier and give yourself some boundary there? And give some grace to the people around you, right? Like, you're not queen of the road. But it should. This is a practical thing, right? Mm-hmm. Like, okay, I want to be more Christ-like. I need to be more Christ-like even when I'm by myself in the car.
100%. For sure.
So the speaking all the time, when I think about that, I'm an introvert, believe it or not. And I think you have some introvert tendencies
100%.
Too. So we tend to be less focused on jumping into every conversation. But there's certainly plenty of extroverts around us who want to participate in conversations. And I'm not saying conversation is bad. What I'm saying is bad is when we join in a conversation and we use our tongue in a way that's less than pleasing to Jesus. Maybe it's sharing some gossip, or maybe it's putting somebody down, judging somebody. And using our tongue to try to judge that person, calling out their weaknesses or their faults or what we perceive to be their sins. And it's weird that we get a certain amount of satisfaction out of that, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was about to ask you. Like, why is it that gossip is always intriguing? Telling stories about the bad things that happen to us are never our fault, and always we're surrounded by idiots, right? Why is this so strong and palpable in our lives when the way that God wants us to be is 100% opposite from these things? But I hear a juicy bit of gossip and I kind of want to tune in, I want to know that, right? And sometimes it's fun to share it, right? Why? Yeah. Why is that? That's so weird.
It's a big issue, I think, in the world and even in the church. I mean, the church, people of the way are just as prone to it. It takes a lot of practice. Again, this is what James is saying. You have to practice at controlling your tongue. This isn't going to just come second nature, because really our nature is to share what we hear, share knowledge or information. I can think of several examples of where I've been hurt by friends and family members when I confide in them and they share it. It feels like a betrayal. It hurts your feelings. I mean, it causes anguish to people. And so on a practical level, we're called by Christ not to do that. In fact, we're called to be loving and kind and care for people. And that would include monitoring what we're saying. We have to work on it all the time.
Which is interesting to me that this is in Scripture so clearly, because I would say of all the issues that humans have, there are some things that I think Christians easily move away from. We still, I mean, everything's a problem, but we easily move away from some things.
Yeah.
Like I would say like drug abuse is underrepresented in Christians. Does it exist? Absolutely. But I would say that that is not a leading problem in Christians. Again, it's there. Christians are flawed. They're not perfect. We're hypocrites, all the stuff, right? But there are just certain temptations that I feel like that we more easily move away from. This one seems like we actually might be worse than others.
It's way more prevalent, right? It's such a part of our daily life, talking.
And I'm pointing 3 fingers back at me, right? Like, I'm not trying to say, hey, those church folks. It's like, no, like, this is really hard.
I know, it really is hard. I mean, the tongue, and James will tell us about it, it's a two-edged sword. On one hand, we bless people with it, and out of the same mouth comes judgment or gossip or negative speech. And man, James, as we'll see later, calls it a raging fire. A raging fire. It causes a raging fire. And it's, so practically speaking, James would want us to recognize the power of the tongue. Recognize its power and work on controlling it. And how do we work on controlling it? Be better listeners. Really listen to people. Slow to speak. Perhaps not join in on conversations that are bad or not good. Slow to offer our advice, our thoughts, and also slow to anger. This whole anger thing is also quite important because when we're mad and we're angry and we speak, that's the worst. I mean, I've had relationships blow up over being angry and saying things that, of course, later I regretted, but the harm is already there. The deed has been done. And then we live with the aftermath of that for a very long time.
Absolutely. Like I would make this statement. I'm curious if you feel the same. In my life, I look back on it, and I don't know if I've ever regretted listening. I've regretted talking, you know? I've regretted talking many times. But I've never regretted listening.
It's kind of a habit. Like, how do you become a better listener? What's the practical way to do that?
And we're not saying become detached from people or not care for people or speak to people. But I think if we look at the ratios in our life, we like talking more than we like listening, which you would never know from me, the way I behave, right?
No, never. I would never know that. No, you are a good listener. That's for sure.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. The other idea that I had is gone. So let's just keep moving because it's gone, Sandy.
You know what? It's just like it was there right within my reach. I mean, I think being a good listener is to be present in the moment and recognize that this person in front of you, which James also gets to, has value, intrinsic value, because it's a person created by God, and not trying to change their mind or respond in a negative way or shoot them down or become the intellectual superior person in the conversation, but to stay in the moment and get to what is the heart of what they're trying to say. What are they trying to speak to? And if it's good and it feels like it's important, you stay with it. If it's bad and they're just, speaking bad things, you get away from it. You just don't participate in it. It takes some, again, discernment or judgment on our part.
Absolutely. And I think we also, it takes, so discernment, judgment, I'd also say humility. Yeah. And the reason why I bring that up is I can think of times in my life where especially the 23-year-old version of me, that I spoke up with such clarity and understanding that I cringe at now. I'm like, don't know if I had it figured out. I don't know if I believe that, right? And then I look at the 30-year-old version of me and I feel the same way. And I hope I'll feel the same way when I'm 50, looking back at me now. And I think leave room for growth in your life. Are you really so clear in your understanding of this that you have something wise to say? Or is it just better to listen to this person and speak back? Look, you're loved. You're loved by God. You're loved by me. I'm sure this is tough. I believe in you. Like, do you have to give those pieces back to them? Do you have to talk, right? And I guess so, that may be a little murky. Basically, approach everything with humility, because you're going to end up probably listening a lot more and a lot less cringe in your life.
I think that's right. And James does speak to how do we approach people, rich people and poor people, and we're going to talk some more about that. But it is a lot. James speaks a lot about people and how we interact with people, because this is the problem or the challenge, is there's what we believe and know and love about Christ and how we want to grow that. But Jesus really calls us into relationship. It's what is the royal law. Love me and love others as you love yourself, this triangle. And so relationships with people require speaking. It kind of does. So we have to, through wisdom, become better at it. To your point, we want to feel like we know a lot more than we do, but this is a very long journey. It's an entire lifetime to get good at this stuff. We need to recognize it's not an instantaneous fix. It's trial and error, over and over and over.
Well, and I think with that, think of, let's say you can put this any framing you want, but let's say you actually know something. Like, something like, hey, if you jump off that cliff, you're going to die, right? Something just as blatantly obvious as that. But you've got a person that really wants to, I think it's going to be fun. If you tell them don't do it because they're not going to respond. But if you were to do, more of a Socratic method of questioning, right? Like, why do you want to jump off the cliff? Now, this analogy will break down very quickly, so let's leave the analogy behind us. But tell me more about that. Why do you feel that way? What are your hopes about that? Just get them thinking and talking for themselves, because I think that's the only way they're going to find the truth. And that's if you're certain, which is rare. If not, you can come and wrestle with this together and at least be together, which I think is more important than the perfect answer. Just people knowing somebody's in the corner.
I think that's totally true. Yeah.
So we have a lot here.
Yeah. We do have a lot. And I kind of want to wrap up today's by talking about, at the end, James talks about what is true religion. So he wants us to understand what being an active believer, an active follower, because we're all believers, but what does being an active follower of Christ require? And he has this little framework for us, very practical, and I feel like we should have this in our mind, that true religion in the eyes of James and in the eyes of Jesus is that it's about how you live your life, your very life, and the way you live your life is religion. The way we live our life as a follower of Christ should be notable and apparent to everybody around us, that we live differently. It should be a life that is offered in the service of the Lord. We should constantly thinking about what can we do to serve the kingdom of God. We need to care for the hearts of others, care for people more than we do, care less about ourselves, care more about others. And we need to work on purifying our heart, which James talks about more, but working on what is in our heart, because whatever is in our heart is what comes out in our actions and what comes out in our speech. So I'm excited about this first discussion and finding our way to becoming active believers or active followers of Christ. Yeah. And what about you?
It's been great. So there's a lot there that you just covered. There's a lot I want to say. I'm not sure of how much to say. Most of the time when I read the Bible, I actually listen to it. And this chapter 1 is 3.5 minutes if you listen to it. And we've been talking for 40 some minutes about it. And that I think is odd, but also really exciting to me, right? Because there is so much here to cover. And there is this listening and this coupling of wisdom. And that's also one thing I love about the book of James is there's always these coupling of ideas that I won't go into it today. We'll save that for the next episode. But wisdom, let's seek more godly wisdom. Let's listen more. And approach that with humility. That's my takeaways from where we're at right now in the story.
I love it. Those are two very fundamental, practical things that we should all strive to do. So it's been great today, Jeremiah, and I look forward to our next conversation about James and his words of wisdom for us. So thank you.
I can't wait. I always enjoy my time with you, Sandy. Talk soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.